Hi, my name is Adina Mangubat, and I am the CEO of Spiral Genetics. Spiral Genetics is a company that produces software for analyzing DNA.
How do you define success?
It's a complicated question. I would say that people view it differently. I mean, some people say that success is an end result, but for me it's much more of a process. So it's definitely being in the process of creating something that is meaningful, generally most likely to other people, because that often helps with business structure and being profitable. But it's also something that is challenging and interesting to me. So it has to be something that's going to be very, very engaging and something that I'm going to be willing to commit to for a really long time. And really long time for me is about 3 years.
Where did your inspiration come from?
I would say that there are two factors to that. So there's the personal, so why did I decide to start a business in the first place? And then there's the, why did I choose this particular business? And the idea that we ended up, working with for Spiral. For the personal side of things, I would say that it's definitely one person in particular, which is Alan Leon. I was a psychology student, and I was really convinced that I was going to go into psychology grad school, and then I took Alan's course, and that totally changed everything for me, and I totally, decided to go a completely different route from where I was originally planning, which is psych grad school. Entrepreneur, kind of different. And the reason why that happened is basically that through Alan's course I decided that I could do anything that I wanted, instead of just being siloed into, oh, you have, this route of getting a job at a corporation or going and getting more education. I decided, let's do something different than the norm. For the business side of things, like where did I get my inspiration for Spiral? It was a long process, to be totally honest. It was a number of, I'm going to go with a year before we actually ended up with the final idea that we worked with. And it was kind of funny. I remember the exact kind of day that it happened. And we were having a conversation that was basically a doomsday. We're not sure if this is going to work. Maybe our technology is too early. Maybe we should start wrapping it up. And I was on a conference call with me and my other two co-founders, Becky and Jeremy, and one of our advisors, Christoph. And it was just one of those right time, right people, right circumstances moments where it was just like, oh, duh, distributed computing and genetics together. It's brilliant. And so that's how it happened. Just sometimes luck.
How did you move from idea to something actually succeeding in the market?
Well, actually succeeding in the market is a little early. Fingers crossed, but we'll see. But in terms of how did we move from an idea to something that we've actually launched as a product, bit by bit, brick by brick, step by step. It's not something that it's not something that magically happens. It's something that you just have to build continuously over time. And I don't think that what I do is that special. I just have more perseverance to keep on doing it every single day, regardless of how the weather outside looks, or how I'm feeling that particular day, or how, the business is going, or all of that stuff. I mean, it's just moving forward, one brick at a time.
How did you organize your team?
That was an interesting one. I got some advice from a friend of mine who ended up being an advisor, which was that for the co-founders to be really specific about what the essentially division of power was going to be for different things. So in the case of Becky, Jeremy, and I, we had a conversation very early on, which was, Jeremy, you get, essentially total control over all decisions that are technical. And Becky, you get all of the ones that are in science, and I get all of the ones that are business and marketing. And if it happened that any of the decisions that we had to make kind of ended up being influenced by business, so for example, there are technical decisions that also impact the business, that I would get the final say at the end of the day. And we found that to be really, really useful because realistically, I didn't have the skills to make the call for the science or the technology and vice versa for all of the others. So it was a really good way of breaking it up. But one of the things that we really strive to do is have a lot of collaboration in what we do, because we realize that there are a lot of things that can be gained by sharing perspectives with other people that just have completely different value sets than yourself. So that's how we organize the team.
If you could have, what would you have done differently?
A lot of things. But I think that's part of the process. Because if I had known to do it differently early on, I would have. But I would say the biggest one that is kind of a continuous theme for me was going with my gut, going with my instinct earlier. Early on, I wasn't really sure what I was doing exactly, and so I took a lot of advice from other people. And at the end of the day, I found that that advice was sometimes useful and sometimes really not. And when it wasn't, it was because I didn't fully understand all the implications of their particular approach, because it wasn't my approach. It wasn't something that I actually understood at a gut level. And so I've gotten to a place where I'm actually operating much more often out of instinct and gut. And if it doesn't feel right in the gut, then I don't do it. And I found that that really serves me a lot better, because at the end of the day, I can feel much more confident and happy with how I operated, because I know that I did the best that I could given the information that I knew. So.
What makes a great entrepreneur?
That is also a tough question. I would say two major pieces come to mind. The first one is, so I would say there's a lot of good entrepreneurs out there, but I think in order to be truly great, the biggest piece is knowing yourself really well, because the type of business that you're going to build is just going to be so different depending on your understanding of your own values and your own motivations. So for example, for me, understanding what are the things that actually drive me and motivate me was really important for the type of business that I ended up building. Because for me, I need something that I'm going to be able to commit to for a long period of time. And if it's not something that's going to be interesting or motivating to me over a long period of time, I'm not going to stick with it. So knowing that about myself was really helpful for building the type of business that I'm building, which is extremely interesting, extremely challenging, and extremely engaging for me. The second piece is listening to understand rather than listening to respond. And that was really important for me, just because I am a business person operating in an extremely technical field. I mean, we're talking about distributed computing, which I'm not an expert on. You know, I have a pretty darn good understanding, but I am not Jeremy. And that same premise goes for the science, the genetics, and Becky. And so coming from a place of really listening to understand how they were thinking about it and why they were approaching the problem they were, the way that they were, was really helpful for me in terms of forming my opinion about what to do in the business sense of things. And I think that if people are operating from that much more kind of collaborative space, the types of businesses that get built are very different.
What role did education have in your success?
Well, clearly, going to Alan's course had a big amount to do with my success. But I would say that other than formal education, there is just a general theme for me of wanting to continually drive my own education personally. And so what it really looks like for me is basically operating in a state where I'm always pushing the upper limits of my comfort zone. So we're in a place where it's like not exactly comfortable, like it's often very uncomfortable because I'm stretching myself a lot. But that want, that drive to actually continually improve has been definitely a key piece in how I have defined my success and why I think I'm succeeding, because I'm not settling for what I've got. I'm pushing and pushing as far as I can go. So we'll see what that looks like in 50 years.
What is the most important question we did not ask you in your answer?
Very tough. I thought about this one for a long time. And the question that I ended up deciding to ask was, what legacy do I want to leave behind? Which I thought was interesting because of the fact that I'm really, really young. Most people my age don't really ask themselves that question. It's usually something that comes much later in life. But I found that the answer to that question has very much shaped my approach to what kind of businesses I want to build. Like, my end goal for myself is a series of businesses. Like, I want to be a serial entrepreneur. And all of the businesses that I want to build are things that are actually going to have meaningful impact on other people's lives. So knowing that, the type of business that I'm creating is something that is definitely going to have impact on other people's lives. I mean, this could be one of the key things that, one of the dominoes that needs to fall in the whole personalized medicine gig. So I would say that the legacy question is something that's been very important for me.